we turn back to the border issue. We just had a conversation with Albert Spratt, who is the Sergeant in Arms for the National Border Patrol Council in the Rio Grande Valley in Texas, where they have caught people from Sri Lanka, India, Bangladesh, from all over the world coming across the border, clearly to escape the violence in Nicaragua. And joining us right now is a congressman from Texas who has said that President Obama is begging for impeachment. It's a pleasure to welcome to the show Congressman Steve Stockman. Good morning, Congressman. How are you?
How are you? I'm doing great. And as you may or may not know, but I was on the border this past weekend. And I find it interesting that the president's allowing this to fester. And I think it's really the reason he's allowing it to fester is to help or try to help turn out the Hispanic vote.
Well, I think there's a political objective behind it, too. I don't think that things happen. Accidents do happen, but accidents rarely happen on this level without some kind of intent behind it, especially when it's so obvious that what's happening is a disaster in terms of American sovereignty. You represent the 36th Congressional District in Texas, and you have said that President Obama is begging to be impeached. Now, I think impeachment would be a catastrophe for the country.
Well, yeah, but if you read the rest of the article, that's exactly what I said. I said he's begging to be impeached in order to raise money and turn out votes. And that's the same position Charles Krauthammer has taken.
I think there could be some truth to that. Dan Pfeiffer.
Oh, well, it's ironic. The president quotes himself. I mean, he uses me as an example of people wanting him impeached, but I'm quoting him, and then he quotes me.
No, it's kind of the hall of mirrors here. We're talking about Congressman Steve Stockman. So we all recognize that impeachment would be a catastrophe for the country. But with that said, we have an administration that is deliberately refusing to enforce the laws of the United States, and not just on the border, on a variety of issues. Remaking the Affordable Care Act as opposed to the statutory impact of the law, the statutory limits that Congress wrote when they passed the law. They're just remaking it through executive action or bureaucratic implementation. And then even on something like prosecution of marijuana, you have the Attorney General essentially announced we're not going to prosecute pot crimes anymore. And again, if you don't want, if you want pot to be legalized, then change the law. But you can't just decide you're not going to enforce one.
Yeah, he did that with the Defense of Marriage Act. He did that also, obviously, on the border. He's done it on numerous issues in which he's decided this is my agenda. You Republicans, it's my way or take the highway. They changed the Senate rules, which during the Republican administration they called it the nuclear option. But now that Obama's done it, it's wisdom and smart and reflective, you know. I mean, we live in an age in which the press distorts what you say, just like what I said. I said he's begging to be impeached so that he can raise money and increase voter turnout. And then from that point, the White House then quotes me quoting them. And he said, that's proof. It is a house of mirrors. And he gets up and starts talking about how mean Republicans are and how we're not trying to get along. And yet it's the Republicans who constantly are giving olive branches to the president, and he ignores it. Remember, during the shutdown, he said, you know, he called us terrorists and said he will not negotiate. Well, with terrorists, he is willing to negotiate. Real terrorists, he is.
And we're talking with Congressman Steve Stockman from Texas. You can follow him on Twitter at SteveWorks4, the number 4U. That's his Twitter handle. So talk to me about where we go from here, because we've got 2.5 years left of this administration, and if we all acknowledge that impeachment is a disaster, would be a disaster for the country, the Speaker of the House, John Boehner, has pushed for, and Congress just passed this resolution for a lawsuit, which is one way of registering a protest against the president usurping powers or failing to perform his constitutionally sworn duties. That's short of impeachment, but I mean, what do we do? How do we get out of this?
Well, I actually, in the article, I actually state what we should do as opposed to impeachment at this time, which is to start cutting his funding. That's the thing he understands is money. This whole left ideology, and it was a cute quote, I think it was by Margaret Thatcher, says the problem with liberal, communism or socialism is that it works until you run out of other people's money. And if we start cutting the funding for various programs, which, by the way, Congress has the constitutional authority where all the money comes from. It's the fountainhead of all the money that's spent in the United States. So we start cutting his funding for his projects, he'll come around and starting to want to negotiate, especially if we take over the Senate.
Now, Congressman, it's my understanding that it's not just the Republicans on the House side or the Senate side that the president doesn't negotiate with. He really doesn't spend a lot of time talking to his own party in either branch of Congress either. No,
and in fact, I think he's a golfer in chief. He's, and anytime you make these statements, they say, well, Bush did this, Bush did that. Well, in fact, Bush didn't golf as much as that. And whenever he did, they called him insensitive. Remember, he was barred from, the governor of Louisiana said, please don't come down here during the hurricane and don't see it. So Bush said, well, okay, well, then I'll fly over in order to make sure I don't interfere with the cleanup. And so they said, here's how insensitive Bush is. He's up in a plane.
Yeah, the famous picture looking out the window, right?
Saying he's, how horrible the president, he doesn't care. Well, here's a president that has a border issue in which now they're predicting hundreds of thousands coming across, not just the nominal amount which the liberals are professing. I went down there firsthand, and the girls are crying because they've been abused on the way up there. And the president's compassion is go shoot pool and drink beer, yet the press is silence.
Well, why is it taking Governor Rick Perry so long to talk about a nominal show of Texas National Guardsmen on the border?
Well, there's some legal questions involved, and I know that our delegation in Texas, we have the largest Republican delegation in the United States. We've been pushing for that, but when we talked with the governor, his problems and his concerns was trying to comply with the law, and also it's costing us $12 million a month to do what the federal government should be doing. And so there was an issue of expense and legal issues, and I think he's overcome that. There's also some point of contention now where he can actually arrest some of the people now. And that's really making, quite frankly, Obama angry because Perry is solving the problem which he doesn't want to solve. Like I said, I think it's primarily the way the president works is to divide the nation and then use it to facilitate his election.
All right. Congressman Steve Stockman, thanks so much for coming on with us. We appreciate it.